Reporteri Bekim Kabashi, po ashtu, po shëndeti mirë se erdhe.
Mirë lartë.
Ka qenë shans i mirë që të marrim informata nga dora e parë për ATV-n, ka qenë edhe privilegj, edhe konfirmim që jemi prej adresave të besueshme mediale në këtë vend, si të tilla e kom kuptu pranin në takim në ambasadë, edhe vetëm për shkak të kësaj arsye është vendim që të transmetojmë të plota përgjigjet e ambasadorit amerikan në anglisht, në original, për të titruara, me qëllim që jo të interpretohen gjëra të cilat mund të jenë ose mos jenë thënë, por ta keni të qartë edhe si shikues edhe si opinion, çka sakt është përgjigje ambasadorit sot, dhe kjo më pas do të na lehtësoj neve në studio të bëjmë analizë që është pak më kredibile dhe pak më e qëndrueshme, që është një prej parimeve me cilat udhëhiqet edhe puna në redaksi, edhe puna në këtë emision. Prania 25 minuta, po besoj, janë përgjigjet e ambasadorit në pyetjet në takimin me 7 gazetarë të pranishëm sot në ambasadë.
Well, let me start with the premise of your question, and I'm really glad you asked it because it gives me a chance to clarify what I think is both a misunderstanding or sometimes a misrepresentation of what the international community is concerned about. We would agree that the dialogue is not necessarily appropriate to discuss internal issues of Kosovo. And so, as I have said myself, as other U.S. government officials have said, we are not challenging the responsibility or the authorities of the central bank. We are not trying to defend the dinar. The United States government does not take a position on what is the means of the currency circulated in Kosovo. That is for Kosovan authorities to determine. What we're concerned about is quite different, and it is very much a dialogue issue and very much something that we have expressed on several occasions and that we believe requires discussion within the dialogue, and that is the question of how the central bank regulation is being enforced and the effect of that enforcement on minority communities and vulnerable communities in Kosovo, including the ethnic Serb community in Kosovo in particular. And now, why do we think this is a dialogue issue? It's very straightforward. Because it is. Under the Adasari plan, under the conditions under which Kosovo received our support for its independence, commitments were made with regard to specific protections and specific arrangements for minority communities in Kosovo. Amongst those were very specific promises that Serbia would be able to, should it choose to exercise this right, to provide support to individuals through social benefit payments and for social services such as health care and education. The manner in which Serbia exercises that right, if it chooses to exercise it, is an important bilateral issue. So our concern all along has been the manner in which the government is enforcing this regulation. It's, as other U.S. government officials have said, it felt both rushed, some have used the word hasty, ill-considered, ill-planned. It has a direct effect on individuals who are vulnerable. As I've said publicly many times, I've talked about a hypothetical 70-year-old living in Klokot or Sturce who has been used to going to a post office to get a payment. It's reasonable for that process to change, but it strikes us as quite irresponsible for that process to change without preparatory work, without working with the affected community, in this case without working with Serbia, the government that is putting the money into the system to support them. Individuals are indeed receiving pensions. Individuals are indeed receiving single-parent stipends and things like that. There is an education system and a healthcare system that provides services to tens of thousands of people. Long-term, the United States government very much believes those systems should be integrated into the Kosovo system through the Association of Serb-Majority Municipalities. We've worked on this for over a decade. But we have to acknowledge that isn't the case right now. And so there has to be some acknowledgement of the existing system and some sympathy for how that will work. I suspect none of us want to see children who are used to receiving education no longer having access to it because the system that's educating them doesn't have sufficient funds. people who are sick no longer being able to access health care because the system supporting them doesn't have adequate supplies or salaries to doctors. That is a dialogue issue. And it isn't just a technical issue. We don't believe Serbia should have a veto on how it will provide that support, but we think it has to be consulted. And it has to acquiesce to it because it has to participate into the system. So that's that. I appreciate you having given me the chance to lay out what our concerns are and aren't. But I will push back on anybody who says the United States is trying to make currency regulation a dialogue issue. We are not. We are trying to take and have be discussed in the dialogue the manner in which this regulation is enforced to ensure that it is done in a way that is responsive to and sensitive to the affected community, and that Serbia also has had some voice in the system under which it will exercise or use the right it has to provide support, which, as I said, is based in Adasari. Well, Valjeta quoted Lajčák already. I don't have much to say beyond what Miroslav Lajčák, who is the special representative for the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, the facilitated dialogue, has said. My understanding of that meeting is that, as well, it was respectful and that some important conversations were had. But I do think it is the EU's judgment, which we do not challenge, that there are some political issues here that need to be discussed as well. So my hope would be that the government of Kosovo, while we have the highest respect for the governor of the central bank, would also have individuals representing Kosovo in these discussions who are empowered and have the ability and authority to help address some of the political issues that are very much a part of this issue. I'm puzzled by the suggestion. We have a good agreement. It was reached almost exactly a year ago. International conferences usually have a role to negotiate texts. Well, there's a very good agreement that has been reached between Kosovo and Serbia. At the time it was reached, the United States and the European Union said we considered it legally binding on both parties. We do. And we've consistently said since that what we expect is the full and complete implementation by both sides of all of their obligations under the agreement. And of course, the implementation annex was agreed a month later in Ohrid. That remains our position. We do not see a need for an international conference. We see a need for stronger political will from both sides to actually fulfill the obligations they have entered into and completely implement their commitments. For Kosovo, since this is the country where I work, that means we expect the government to do some things. We expect it to move forward with the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities, for example. That's an early step in this process. And I will note again that some of the concerns we have raised related to the enforcement of the central bank regulation would have gone away if we had a functioning Association of Serb Majority Municipalities. Because all along the assumption has been this will become the means, consistent with Kosovo law, under Kosovo law, transparent to the government of Kosovo, under which Serbia provides the support for the education and healthcare services, for example. So that's our position. There's not a need for conferences. There's a need for political will and action from both governments to implement fully all of their obligations. And we're disappointed that that doesn't seem to be the case. So let me start with the question of partnership. I don't believe partnership is a binary thing, yes, no, or on-off. I see it as much more nuanced than that. We can have good and strong partnership. We can have, less strong partnership. We can have insufficient partnership, right? But I don't think it's as simple as yes or no, with all due respect to your question. I can only be honest. I don't think my government can signal more clearly than the ways we have signaled thus far that we are dissatisfied with the quality of our partnership with the Kurti government at this time. That we do not believe that the Kurti government has been sufficiently attentive to concerns we have consistently raised about the plans for and the subsequent enforcement of the central bank regulation. We are not doing this, as I said, to defend the dinar. We are doing this because it is important to the United States and our partners, because we're not alone in this at all. That the government of Kosovo act in a manner that is consistent with the commitments it has made to ensure that all members of its society, including members of minority communities, including the ethnic Serb community in Kosovo, can live in conditions of dignity and security. And we believe that the way in which this regulation is being enforced does not do that sufficiently. We believe that it is harming vulnerable people. We believe that it is causing real concern in a community that is unnecessary. So it has affected the quality of our partnership. I can't say more right now other than to say we don't want it to be that way. But we believe the reason for the reduction in the quality of our partnership, the reason why I cannot tell you the partnership is strong and positive, is because of this choice and because of the government's thus far lack of sufficient response to the concerns we have raised. So I will leave that there on the question of partnership. Just on the question of U.S. sanctions, I am aware that over the weekend there was some irresponsible and incorrect reporting about decisions by the United States government with regard to designating individuals. As a matter of policy, we do not preview or talk about decisions to impose sanctions or designate someone until we make it public, but I can say that if we are going to designate or sanction someone, you're going to know. And the way you're going to know is not because of some small Twitter account by a questionable source. It's going to be as a result of a clear, determinative statement by the United States government. That has not happened, and I do not believe it's going to happen in the case of the individuals laid out, identified this weekend. So I don't know that it's appropriate for me to divulge the content of what is privileged diplomatic communication between the American ambassador and the Prime Minister of Kosovo. I will say this. My government clearly recognizes Kosovo as a sovereign, independent, democratic state. And we clearly acknowledge Prime Minister Kurti as the democratically elected, legitimate Prime Minister of Kosovo. There's no question there. We do have frequent conversations about shared interests and vision. The United States wants to see Kosovo advance in its European and Euro-Atlantic trajectory. But that doesn't come for free. And I've noticed that a number of people in Kosovo seem surprised that while the United States has supported, does support, and will support the people of Kosovo, the project of Kosovo, this idea, this effort to see this country fully realize its potential, which we are as committed to as we've ever been, that does not mean that we're going to give carte blanche to any government of Kosovo on the policy choices it makes. And we shouldn't. Kosovo made commitments about how it will treat its minority communities. Those commitments were enshrined in the Ahtisaari plan, but they were also enshrined in Kosovo's law. Your own Declaration of Independence and Constitution built those in, and on that basis we fully supported and continue to support this project. So no one should be surprised if we find the government not fully acting in accordance with those promises as we understand them. And that is also, of course, part of the conversations we frequently have. But of course they can. It's a question of political will. Of course they can. And other governments of Kosovo have done so. I have seen other governments in Kosovo do things that were hard because it was in the interest of the country and because it advanced a shared agenda and vision. And in fact, most of our work with governments of Kosovo since independence and before has been precisely on how do we do some hard things together that we know will be challenging. So of course it is possible. My hope is the government will acknowledge, because if you read Jim O'Brien's interview carefully, he makes clear the United States hand is still openly stretched out, of course, towards the authorities of Kosovo. We want a strong, good partnership. We want to see Kosovo advance. But we will have and will continue to raise real concerns when we feel that the government is pursuing policies that impede this vision together. So I can only speak again now to these issues under the EU-facilitated dialogue. Kosovo would benefit so much from moving forward with the full and complete implementation of the commitments it entered into in the Basic Agreement and the Ohrid Implementation Annex, including without regard to what Serbia does. We all acknowledge Serbia absolutely has obligations it must do as well that will benefit Kosovo. But all of these things we want to see for Kosovo, moving towards NATO, moving towards the EU, achieving Council of Europe membership, advancing on its trajectory, are made easier by it being responsive to the commitments it's entered into, such as establishing the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities, or at least taking this draft statute that we provided that we believe completely respects the red lines we share. No executive authorities, no changes to Kosovo's constitution, no Republika Srpska. And moving into the Constitutional Court now, So the Constitutional Court can make the decision as to whether it complies with the Constitution or not. I've been amazed by the number of people who have opinions on this who are not constitutional scholars or experts. But let's let the actual entity responsible for this question do its job. And in so doing, benefit significantly this country and the people of Kosovo, which, as I hope you hear, remains a high priority for me personally and for my government. I don't know that I'm in a position to evaluate that any better than any of us here. There's some logic here. When people suddenly stop receiving pensions or social benefit payments, they're going to be irritated. When parents are concerned about the quality and access to education, they're going to be irritated. When individuals don't necessarily have the same confidence in a healthcare system that they once had, they're going to be irritated. And irritated people at times express their irritation in different ways. Part of what we're trying to do is work with the government of Kosovo to address these concerns so that there isn't the possibility of more unrest or problems. And I've been worrying that some people might seek to exploit this opportunity because people who are vulnerable, who are feeling irritated, can be stirred up in ways that are also deeply unhelpful to what we're all trying to achieve. I hope we all want to avoid that possibility. I don't have any particular insights. I'm just laying out kind of the logic of this. But I think it does speak to the urgency of the government of Kosovo working with the United States, the EU, Miroslav Lajčák, others to find a way forward that addresses these concerns. And I think solutions are there. Well, I mean, first of all, the United States supports completely the effort to advance a sovereign, democratic, multi-ethnic, successful Kosovan state. And we've invested a lot of ourselves, of our assistance. Some of our best U.S. government officials over generations of diplomats and security professionals have invested themselves in this project. I include myself in that, and I'm proud of the many different ways in my career I've been able to support the people of Kosovo in this trajectory. So that we're going to tolerate always. I mean, that is over. This idea that somehow Kosovo's status is still in question, that somehow Kosovo could maybe somehow no longer be an independent sovereign country, that is solved. That is done. The United States took a decision in 2008, and we will not look back. That doesn't mean that any individual government of Kosovo can assume full support for all of their policies. That hasn't been the case, and it is certainly not the case right now. On the question of next steps, if we feel that the government is not fully responsive to us, I can't say much more than what I've already said. It has already affected the quality of our partnership. We are thinking through what that means. I'm not in a position to give any specifics at this time, but I would just say that it is already having an effect. And I hope that we can get to a different place soon, so that we can mitigate those effects and so we can go back to working together in a more constructive and positive way towards seeing Kosovo's European and Euro-Atlantic trajectory advance more effectively and more rapidly. But that means the government of Kosovo's got to do some things that thus far this government has not been doing. So it's hard for an American diplomat to lay out the motivations for or process to change decisions taken by the EU. And so I don't know that I can say much more other than to refer you to the EU on a large part of that question. I would just say this. I understand why so many authorities in the government of Kosovo and so many citizens of Kosovo would like to see the EU measures lifted. I think they were established in a certain context, and that context, again, were some choices made by the government of Kosovo that we all fundamentally disagreed with, and that resulted in some of these things happening. So to the extent the government wants to have a different dynamic, which I understand and support, the government can help create that different dynamic by being responsive to the European Union, the United States, and others. So I think it's almost always a bad idea for a foreign official to seek to explain the position of the head of government of another country. So I'm not going to try to explain what is stopping or impeding Prime Minister Kurti's government from moving the draft statute for the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities to the Constitutional Court. I can only lay out our hope and expectation that it will do so, and my advice that it do so quickly, sooner rather than later, without regard to what Serbia does, because in so doing, it will benefit Kosovo substantially. It will resolve this question of whether this thing is constitutional or not, resolve the question of how much executive authorities it has or doesn't have. We believe none, but let the court make that determination. It will create a different dynamic, and it will reflect Kosovo's commitment to fulfilling its obligations under the basic agreement and working with us on, again, one of the more sensitive issues. I acknowledge it as a sensitive issue, but the status and situation of the ethnic Serb community in Kosovo, which is an important issue. It's not the only one, but it's an important one. So I can only say that we hope that that happens soon, and that has been our consistent advice. On the question of how to formalize the commitments made in the Basic Agreement and the Ohrid Implementation Annex, again, I think I can only restate my position, or my government's position, and my understanding in this regard of the EU's position. We consider it to be formalized. We consider it to be legally binding. And we have said that publicly. The EU is going through the process to build it into the accession processes for both countries, appropriately from our perspective as well. We're not the facilitators of the dialogue, however. That is Miroslav Lajčák's to do. My understanding is he has given the government a number of other ideas or options for them to consider of how this thing could be formalized in a way that is more satisfactory to the government of Kosovo, because I am aware this is a concern that the Prime Minister has raised frequently, as have other government officials. But I think you'd have to ask them whether any of those options have been seen as sufficient or not. So it is, again, a bad idea for me to confirm what Serbia has or has not done. I can confirm it is our understanding, as Assistant Secretary O'Brien laid out, that that is the case. But I think the question of precisely the status of the letter and to what extent Serbia considers itself to be bound by all of its obligations under the Basic Agreement is a question to pose to the authorities of Serbia. I can restate the U.S. government position. We consider both Kosovo and Serbia to have entered into obligations that are legally binding. That remains our position. I'm probably the least qualified person in this room to give that assessment. I mean, I understand. I mean, I'd almost like to ask you that question and get your impression, because you're living it much more than I am. So I can't speak to what I observe. I can speak to what I hear. And when I speak with individuals that I believe to be credible representatives of civil society, be they ethnic Serbs or ethnic Albanians, many of the credible representatives of civil society that I speak to do talk about there being more distance between the communities right now than there had been in the past. I hope that changes, and I want that to change, because again, I think the promise and the vision of Kosovo is a multi-ethnic society in which all citizens live in conditions of dignity and security. That's what we are working very hard to advance through our policy work, through our assistance programs, and other things. And I will continue doing what I can to advance that as long as I am here as the Ambassador of the United States of America to Kosovo. I can't speak to how effective that is. I do note that I think Prime Minister Kurti is the first Prime Minister to actually do public remarks in Serbian language to the Serbian community. I have heard commentary back from civil society organizations that not all those presentations were found fully persuasive, but that is for them to say, not me. I certainly encourage the Prime Minister to engage, and his team to engage actively and effectively with all communities in Kosovo, be it Gorani, Egyptian, Turks, Ashkali, others, as well as the Serb community. But those are important things for any government. Because again, our vision's the same. I mean, what we hope to see is a society that is truly multi-ethnic, and in which all ethnicities, be they the majority or minorities, feel that they are protected and served by their government and live in conditions of dignity and security. And a lot of our work as the U.S. Embassy in Kosovo is to advance that vision, whether it's our work on the economy, whether it's our work on good governance, whether it's our work on promoting the rule of law, whether it's our work to support the EU-facilitated dialogue as the only path to advance Kosovo's European and Euro-Atlantic trajectory. All that work we do is to help create those conditions. Well, on your last point, I think I said something earlier that we have been disappointed with the extent to which either side has implemented the obligations they entered into in the Basic Agreement and in the Ohrid Implementation Annex. And we hope that there will be greater political will from both Kosovo and Serbia to do so. I don't want to get into motivations or strategic plans for how you use this or that. I can just lay out our expectation. Our expectation is that the government of Kosovo will move forward with a statute to establish an association of Serb majority municipalities. The first step is taking a good statute that we believe they already have and sending it to the Constitutional Court for review to confirm that it does not require, that it is consistent with Kosovo's current constitution, as it should be, as it must be. And on the central bank regulation, again, I said quite a lot about that earlier, we just look to the government to find a manner to enforce it that builds in enough time and is responsive to the ethnic Serb community and others so that they continue to have access to social benefit payments and so that they continue to have, so that the health care and education systems continue to receive financial support so they can provide services to the community. That's what we're looking for. I think with regard to specific consequences for the moment we're in, I don't know that I can say more than I've said. We do not believe that we are enjoying the partnership at the level we want or have experienced in the past. That has consequences and implications. I want to say something I said earlier as well, though. The United States is as committed as it's ever been to the people of Kosovo. We have been with the people of Kosovo from the beginning. We are with the people of Kosovo now, and we will be with the people of Kosovo. Now, we are with them, as I said, in the context of our vision, which we believe to be shared as enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and Constitution of this country, of a sovereign, democratic, multi-ethnic state in which all citizens live in conditions of peace and security. That remains the case. And so, and we will not step back from that commitment or partnership to the people. As I've said before as well, though, that does not mean that every government of Kosovo is going to get support for choices they make. To the extent their choices align with that vision, we will support them. To the extent that we believe those choices detract from or hinder those objectives, we will be critical. The specifics of how that would play out and what precisely we would do, as I've said a couple times, it's not time to get into those specifics. I can only speak to the fact that a degraded partnership has consequences and implications.